I'm Vamp, and this is a guide on how to approach Mythic Crosus as a Holy Paladin. This guide assumes that you have a rough understanding of the encounter on Mythic difficulty, and that you are also familiar with the Holy Paladin. Bear in mind that this guide is built from my own experience of the encounter, and there can be subtle differences from guild to guild. Here are my chosen talents for this encounter. Tier 1 is worth talking about here, as in my opinion all 3 options are viable, and it will mostly be down to personal preference as to which talent you take. I chose Bestow Faith purely because both tanks are taking consistent damage throughout the encounter, so it's a mana efficient heal that will have a good chance of landing. Light's Hammer would have been my choice if I felt I had the mana to be able to use the spell on cooldown. As there are such frequent bursts of raid damage on this encounter, it is incredibly easy to use this spell on cooldown without it overhealing, but it comes with a very high mana cost, so it's up to you really. I would normally dry up as the encounter finishes, but if you're a little more efficient with your mana than I am, then feel free to try it. Crusader's Might can be great as it allows us to have Light of Dawn ready more often on an encounter where we can use it pretty much on cooldown with great effect. It's just a decision of do we have the spare global cooldowns to keep throwing the Crusader strikes out as the encounter progresses. Crusader's Might is also a strong consideration if your raid is lacking the DPS required to kill Crosus within his enrage timer, as it improves our burst DPS on the pool by a large margin. The aura that you choose also needs to be considered carefully. Sacrifice is by far the most potent on this encounter, but it can also leave you incredibly vulnerable if you have lower item level or lower artifact level due to the amount of extra damage you'll be taking during each large AoE on the raid. Devotion Aura can also be incredibly strong in this encounter if your raid is finding specific areas of the encounter difficult to heal through. The instant orb into slam combos when on the final piece of the bridge come to mind. In summary, take Sacrifice if it won't get you killed, and Mercy if it will, then consider Devotion if your raid is struggling to heal through a specific area of the encounter. In general, Crosus is an incredibly simplistic single-phase encounter that has a tight DPS requirement. As a Holy Paladin it feels great as the raid nearly always needs healing and both tanks are consistently taking a beating at the same time, so we'll start with the obvious, beacons on both tanks for the duration of the encounter. Then it's purely a case of going through the motions. Crosus rotates through his slams, orbs, burning pitches and fell beams throughout the encounter, and it's our job to top the raid up in between each of these to ensure that they are able to survive the next. In terms of healing playstyle, there isn't really anything special we need to do here. The small gaps in between his abilities do leave enough time for Light of Dawn's cooldown to reset, so it can get some great use here, and as the raid is often stacked up, we will get some strong value out of our mastery also. For the Burning Pitch, your raid leader will have most likely assigned you to a specific area to lurk around and soak what you can at that location, but always keep in mind how tanky we are compared to pretty much every other member of the raid. Even with only the use of Divine Protection, we are able to soak 3 pitches at once, though if you do fear for your life doing this, Divine Shield is obviously fantastic for this also. Efficient soaking of the pitches is incredibly important towards having success in this encounter, as we want to spend as much time DPSing Crosus as possible, therefore the less ads we spawn, the better, so do not be afraid to try and soak as many as you can in your area. Our other main focus here are the tanks. Crosus will be consistently applying Sear and Brand, a stacking damage over time debuff to his current target, which results in requiring the tanks to rotate threat, meaning one tank will always be taking hits from Crosus, whilst gaining stacks of Sear and Brand, and the other tank will be doing what they can to survive the dot as it expires, so we need to keep a keen eye on both at all times. Depending on your tank's ability to play and to a degree their class, they may need nothing more than your beacon heals, or they may need some real focus, especially when their stacks of Sear and Brand get high. On average, I would say tanks don't want to be getting more than 3 to 4 stacks before making a switch, but this can be tricky at times as the time Crosus spends hitting the tanks instead of using an ability can vary during the encounter, meaning sometimes your tank may even take 5 stacks of the debuff, and when you see this happen is when you want to give them some special attention. We also want to ensure that the tanks are fully topped off for each slam. Both tanks will be taking a large hit which they should be mitigating a good portion of, but we obviously want to make sure that there's no chance they die here, as it is the only large spike of damage they can take, so do not let it take you off guard. If your guild does have consistent trouble with tank deaths, with you doing nearly everything you can to ensure they rarely get low and are topped for slams, you'll most likely need to consider what they are doing themselves, because with Legion in particular, tanks are incredibly self-sufficient. Obviously if they're receiving no meaningful heals for 3 to 4 seconds before their death, then we're going to look at what the healers are doing, but the tanks themselves have plenty of utility and useful talents to help themselves through this encounter. To sum that up, if your tanks are struggling, first identify if it's the healers or the tanks at fault, and then try to identify why it's their fault. With how detailed Warcraft logs is nowadays, you can use this as an incredibly efficient tool to help with this, so if your guild doesn't use logs, I highly suggest you start doing so. With all of that out of the way, in terms of efficiently healing through this encounter, a solid healing throughput and damage reduction cooldown rotation is 100% required, and we want to make best use of our personal throughput cooldowns to work with this rotation. In this video example, both possible uses of my Aura Masteries are set in stone, as are all 3 uses of my Avenging Wrath, which leaves me with Holy Avenger to toy around with. So let's look at this logically. My first wings and aura are locked in at separate times, and we desperately want a cooldown to go with Aura Mastery as we use in Sacrifice, so Holy Avenger is the only option here. Locking that in at 1 minute and 30 seconds means we have the all clear to use it directly on the pull, as its cooldown will line up perfectly. And likewise, if we choose to, we can use it on cooldown for the remainder of the encounter if needed, as our third wings lines up with our second aura. Before I end up overloading you with information that will be in my general healing guide, on an encounter like this it is incredibly important that we maximise the use of our cooldowns, as this is so healing intensive. Free healing this encounter is currently part of the standard composition, so that makes it even more important. I will emphasise the use of Aura Mastery with Wings and Holy Avenger at 5 minutes here, as it's during both an Orb of Destruction and a Slam, and the beauty of this timing is that both of these fit inside Aura Mastery's duration, so you can get some disgusting value out of it, somewhere in the region of 20 to 30 million effective healing. The final thing to mention, and I promise that this is the last thing, is the Enrage timer. As I've already mentioned, it is ridiculously tight, especially if you're progressing on the encounter. If your raid is close to or struggling to meet the Enrage of 6 minutes, then feel free to lay into Croesus at the start of the encounter. No real healing is required for the first 20 to 30 seconds, so do what you can. Remember, any cooldowns that you won't be needing for some time later into the encounter, you can use to help your DPS, and if you want to go that extra step, Potion of Old War is fantastic. I wish you the best of luck against Croesus, and thank you for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.